They tried to silence me at work in the quietest way possible. No shouting. No warnings. No dramatic confrontation. Just small, deliberate moves designed to erase me. My calendar invites stopped coming. My access permissions were temporarily limited. My manager stopped making eye contact in meetings and began speaking about me as if I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. It happened so slowly that anyone watching from the outside would have called it a coincidence. But I knew better. Silence, when it's engineered, is louder than any threat. My name is Evelyn Carter, and for 6 years I worked at our dentist group, a global logistics and infrastructure firm that moved more money in a week than most countries did in a year. On paper, I was a senior risk analyst. In reality, I was the person who checked what everyone else assumed was already checked. I didn't make noise. I didn't posture. I read contracts, traced transactions, and followed patterns no one else had the patience to follow. That was my value. And that was exactly why I became a problem. It started with a spreadsheet I wasn't meant to open. A shared drive error. One folder nested too deep, one permission misapplied. Inside were reconciliation sheets tied to Project Helios, a multinational port expansion funded by a mix of sovereign wealth funds, pension pools, and private equity. Publicly, Helios was our dentist's crown jewel. Internally, it was treated like a fragile ego never questioned, never audited too closely. But the numbers didn't line up, not by rounding errors, by hundreds of millions. At first, I assumed I was missing context. I always did. That was my rule. Assume you're wrong before assuming fraud. I spent nights cross-checking vendor invoices against transfer schedules, tracing shell contractors back through 3 layers of holding companies. Patterns emerged. The same intermediaries, the same jurisdictions, the same timing funds moving just before reporting cutoffs, then reappearing reclassified weeks later. It wasn't sloppy. It was elegant. Too elegant. I raised it quietly. An email to my direct supervisor, Mark. Neutral language. No accusations. Just questions. He replied 2 days later with a single sentence. Let's not overcomplicate a project that's already been signed off. That should have been the end of it. That's where most people stop. That something about his phrasing bothered me. Signed off by whom? Risk sign-off didn't mean immunity. It meant accountability. So I kept digging. I didn't download anything. I didn't print. I worked inside the system, during approved hours, using approved tools. And every night the gap widened. By my rough estimate, Helios was hiding liabilities north of $2.3 billion parked. Disguised, deferred, but very real. If they surfaced, it wouldn't just be a bad quarter. It would be catastrophic. Investors, governments, regulators, careers, reputations, prison. The pressure started the following week. My badge failed once, then twice. IT said it was a glitch. My name disappeared from a strategy meeting invite I'd been attending for years. A junior colleague was reassigned to support me, though he asked more questions than he answered. HR sent a vague email about upcoming role realignments. No one said my name. They didn't need to. I was being managed out without a trace. The moment I knew it was intentional came on a Tuesday evening. I stayed late to finish a risk memo, one last attempt to document concerns through official channels. When I tried to save it, the system rejected the file. Permission denied. 10 minutes later, my access to the Helios directory was gone entirely. Not read-only. Gone. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint against the glass, and understood the message perfectly. Stop looking. I didn't. Instead, I backed away. That's the mistake people make when they think resistance means pushing harder. Real resistance is quieter. I requested sick leave. I stopped logging in remotely. I let them think I was scared or confused or compliant. And while they were busy congratulating themselves on a clean containment, I called someone I trusted, Daniel Ruiz, a forensic accountant who'd left our dentist 2 years earlier under mutual separation. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said one thing. If your numbers are right, they're not trying to silence you. They're racing you. That night, I copied nothing from our dentist. I didn't need to. I reconstructed everything from memory, timestamps, and secondary confirmations, bank settlement delays, public tender amendments, contractor registry filings. We met off-site, used clean devices, and rebuilt the trail piece by piece. It took weeks. During that time, our dentists accelerated their plan. I was called into HR, offered a transition package. Generous, if I signed immediately. NDA. Non-disparagement. A clause requiring me to certify that I'd raised no unresolved concerns. I smiled. Asked for time. They frowned. Time was the one thing they couldn't afford. By Friday, my office access was revoked entirely. My email auto-forwarded to a generic address. Security escorted me out with practiced politeness. No one met my eyes. By 9 a.m., I was officially gone. By noon, they thought the threat was neutralized. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that the truth had already started moving. Slowly, methodically, toward people who couldn't be silenced. By the time I walked out of the Ardentis building with a cardboard box in my hands, they were already celebrating upstairs. I know that now. At the time, all I felt was a strange calm, the kind that comes when fear has already done its worst, and there's nothing left to protect. They thought the problem had been removed. They were wrong. The problem had only changed shape. Daniel and I didn't go to the press. That's the mistake amateurs make. Noise gives people time to prepare defenses. We went where our dentist couldn't interfere directly, to the capital partners whose money was on the line. Pension boards. Infrastructure funds. 2 sovereign entities whose names never appear in headlines. We didn't accuse. We presented timelines. We showed cash flow gaps. We demonstrated how liabilities have been shifted just long enough to pass audits, then quietly rerouted back into affiliated entities. The reaction was never emotional. It was surgical. The first call came 3 days after my termination. A compliance officer from one of the funds asked a single question. How confident are you? I answered honestly. Enough to put my career and reputation behind it. That was all he needed. Within 48 hours, independent auditors were engaged, not the firms our dentists usually controlled, but external teams with no prior relationship. Our dentists didn't even know yet. The requests were framed as routine reviews tied to funding milestones. No alarms. No warnings. Inside the company, panic didn't arrive as chaos. It arrived as meetings. Closed-door meetings. Calendar blocks labeled strategic alignment. Executives who had ignored me for years suddenly started calling Daniel, asking why his name was showing up in audit correspondence. He didn't answer. Silence again, but this time it wasn't theirs to wield. The first crack appeared in the markets. A minor delay in a bond issuance. Analysts shrugged it off. Then a rating agency placed Helios-linked instruments on watch, still manageable. Our dentist issued a confident statement about temporary reporting adjustments. Their stock dipped, then stabilized. They thought they could contain it. They always do until the math stops obeying them. What they hadn't accounted for was the timing. When the auditors began reconciling liabilities across jurisdictions, the deferred obligations collided. Accounts meant to stay invisible surfaced simultaneously. What had been a series of controlled illusions became a single, undeniable number. Just over $2 billion. Uninsured. Unhedged. Unexplainable. The night it broke, I was sitting at my kitchen table. Laptop closed, phone face down. Daniel called at 11:42 p.m. "It's out," he said. All of it. By morning, regulators had frozen Helios-related transfers. By noon, our dentist board announced an internal investigation. By close of market, their valuation had been halved. Executives who'd smiled while escorting me out were now issuing statements through lawyers, carefully avoiding the word fraud, while describing errors so large they defied innocence. They tried to shift blame. A mid-level manager was placed on leave. Then another. Names floated. None of them stuck, because the paper trail didn't point downward. It pointed exactly where I'd said it did from the very beginning. The same people who'd decided I was expendable were now the focus of subpoenas. The same systems they'd weaponized against me were now locked down by court order. No one from our dentist called me. Not an apology. Not a threat. Nothing. When an organization collapses under its own weight, it doesn't look for the person who warned it. It looks for exits. But others did call. Funds I'd briefed thanked me quietly. A regulator asked if I'd be willing to provide testimony. And one unexpected email arrived from a firm I'd admired from afar, asking if I'd consider leading a new risk integrity unit. I didn't answer right away. Victory, when it comes, deserves patience. Weeks later, the headlines were everywhere. Accounting scandal. Infrastructure giant under federal scrutiny. $2 billion exposure uncovered. My name never appeared. That was intentional. The truth doesn't always need a face. Sometimes it just needs room to exist. People ask me now if it was worth it losing my job, my security, my anonymity. I tell them this. They made one mistake at work. They assumed silence meant weakness. They assumed compliance meant ignorance. They assumed I needed them more than I needed the truth. That assumption cost them everything. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I was precise. Because I waited. Because I understood that systems built on concealment always collapse, not from rebellion, but from exposure. And when they do, they don't fall on the people they try to erase. They fall on the people who built them that way. That's the part no one expects.